Well, welcome. My name is Eric Friedman. I'm the Executive Director of the Mad River Valley Chamber of Commerce, and we are here for a candidate forum for the Vermont House of Representatives, District 2. And I'd like to start off by just thanking LaRue Farms and the American Flatbread for hosting us here. And the Green Mountain Photo Show is going on behind us. And if you haven't been down here yet, it's showing through October 9th, so come check that out. Great Mad River Valley Arts production. And I'd also like to thank Mad River Valley Television for covering this and doing the good civic work that you guys always do. Shout out to you, Tony. First of all, I just want to talk about kind of the purpose of what we're doing here today. I'm really appreciative of the Valley Reporter's recent candidate forum, and I encourage people to go to mrvtv.com and watch it. And this one, and the purpose of this one is to kind of focus a little bit more on the business aspects of the discussion and get the candidates' views and perspectives in regard to the Mad River Valley business community. So that's kind of where we're at. In terms of the format, we will be doing a relatively informal conversation. Each candidate will have a minute and a half or so to answer each question. I have prepared the questions in advance and have solicited some others from the business community. And I've also asked each candidate to come up with a question to be answered by the other candidates. And I have to give full credit to the folks at the Valley Reporter who meant to ask that in their forum. And I thought it was a good idea, but they didn't have enough time to do so. So I thought we'd kind of take that and do that idea. With that, I'd like to introduce our candidates. We have Rebecca Baruzzi on the end over there. She's an independent candidate from the town of Fayston. And we have Dara Torrey from Moortown, and she's the Democratic candidate.
Yes.
From Moortown. And we have Jean Bufano from Warren, and Jean is an independent candidate as well. And Carrie Dolan is our incumbent legislator in our district and is running for re-election. So welcome. Thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate it. The first question, I have to change my page here. In terms of the first question of the day, from your perspective, I'd like to know how you define the role on the House as being a role of our House representative for the Mad River Valley and representing the business community. Let's start with you, Rebecca.
Okay, so as a representative, how would I best represent this community?
How do you see your role?
How do I see the role?
In terms of with the business community?
All right, so I see my role, if elected, is very bottom-up, grassroots. Being connected with people here and understanding what the issues are. I imagine I would work closely with you related to anything about business interests that perhaps aren't being served, and then through that would try to leverage whatever I could in the State House that could be helpful for our business community.
Awesome, thank you. Dara?
Yes, good question. Businesses are, really important part of our community. They're involved in our being able to thrive. They're staffed up by people, hopefully, that live here. A lot of business leadership based right here in the Valley. So for me, I would want to work really closely and learn and listen from our business owners about what's working and what could be better. And I have a lot to learn because I'm not a business owner. I've been an employee of a variety of businesses in this valley and have been a partner with the Chamber in various studies of our business culture and climate in the past. So that's really what I would do is really listen and learn how best to support our community.
Thanks, Tara. Gene?
Well, I see the government in any respect working for the people, and businesses are in some respect people. So I see working with organizations to come up with solutions and how to have businesses thrive. One example is there's a couple of $1 billion set aside for chip manufacturers. Big business, very high-tech jobs, people and so forth. So working with the Vermont Chamber to go out and attract businesses. My business career, I have a Bachelor of Science in Business and Marketing that I've used extensively in corporate America and as a mayor. I have an associate's, an equivalent to an associate's degree in electronic engineering, so I understand when I hear people talking about the last mile, I know what they're talking about and how they need help in struggling. So using my business to help the legislature understand business and what it needs to do, but to make a business-friendly climate. We need a climate where people in business can thrive, and sadly, I don't believe Vermont is that place.
Thanks, Gene. Carrie?
Businesses in particular, our small businesses, are central to our economy, our vitality. And fortunately, I've had 4 years of experience in the legislature working with our businesses. And that work is fundamental to ensure that we can maintain the health of our communities. I've been active in 2 caucuses where people actually check their party at the door and work together on common issues. One of them is the Tourism Caucus, recognizing that tourism and outdoor recreation are fundamental, are major employers for our area, and a major business source that attracts people to the state, as well as provide for that economic vitality of our communities. I'm also active on what's called the Rural Economic Development Working Group, where smaller communities, representatives from smaller towns, come together to identify what are the common issues that are facing our communities and how can we best magnify our voices to represent that. And finally, what's critical to this work is being accessible. And pre-COVID, I've had at least 4 meetings a week, being accessible to the people here, to businesses. When COVID hit, I went into that Zoom world, which wasn't much fun. I really look forward to working again, being accessible to our businesses to help me work for the issues that they identified.
All right, thanks, Carrie. And that's a reminder, we all do not have to wear pants now going forward.
Noted.
Okay? So our next question. What do you see as the most vital issue for businesses in the Mad River Valley, and how would you specifically address it? Dara?
I would say workforce. I've been talking to a lot of business owners all over the valley, and I'm hearing that the lack of housing means lack of workers. And we have our demographic challenges ahead of us in Vermont, which will further constrain workers if we can't attract people and house them here. And I also, I've worked in the tourism field here in the valley. I worked at Sugarbush for many years, and I know how important our customer service is and how people notice it when they come here, and they feel it when they come here. And a lot of it comes from having people who work here that also live here and love it and want to share it. So for me, that's a huge threat for our community, to not have people able to live here and work here.
Okay. Gene?
It's complicated. It is complicated. It is what the issue of housing for people, and that is a critical issue. But it's also having a place for businesses to develop, and we really don't have a place where we can get a high-tech company come in with good-paying jobs to put their place. I mean, it's without changes to zoning, and I think that's part of it, how we regulate businesses and how we can make those regulations more amenable. As far as housing and living in the valley, I grew up in the Bronx. I commuted to Manhattan because I couldn't afford to live there. But there are surrounding communities such as Granville and Rochester, which are beautiful places that, maybe you can't afford a house here. But I couldn't afford to live in Manhattan when I had raised my 2 kids in Westchester County. I'd get on that train every day. So housing is important, but attracting businesses and then developing out housing, maybe not necessarily in Warren or Faison, because, by the way, I'm fighting with the select board, actually our planning rules on their plan to do that, which is, I've written a couple articles. So we need to look at regulation. We need to look at safety. People aren't going to work where it's not safe. And if you look at places like Chicago, businesses are leaving. So we need to have a safe environment, a place where the taxes aren't crazy, and a place where housing is available. And maybe we have to change our zoning and so forth to allow maybe more consolidated housing, which I think is really reasonable. So as a mayor, I address those problems in my little town, and we solved a lot of them.
All right, thanks, Gene. Carrie, you remember the question? Okay.
I would have said workforce in particular, but it comes back to housing as well.
I did not know that.
Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Housing is a crisis in this area, and we see that every day when we decide to go to a restaurant and find out that they can't find employees to work there, as well as our other small businesses here in the area. They're struggling with finding employees, and part of it is not being able to have enough housing stock. And so in the last year, we've put in close to $80 million of housing. But when you look at the data, since 1970 to 2019, the number of housing starts had plummeted in this area and across the state by something on the order of 79%. And so when we talk about housing, we need to look at supply, we need to look at housing that's affordable. That may mean smaller lot sizes in our communities. We need to be more welcoming to people coming into this business, and we need to look at where we can rehab old buildings, vacant buildings. We need to also improve our existing housing stock so that people are more comfortable in their homes and they have healthier outcomes. So I would say that when we can address that housing crisis, we will be able to then attract businesses that come in here with their capacity to hire new employees. We can support our small businesses and their capacity to be able to find people. We support the teachers and our healthcare providers who can live where they're working. And I think much of that can all add to the vitality of our communities.
All right, thank you.
I need the question again.
You need that? Well, it's been a while, right?
I know the answer is housing.
Yeah, it's always about housing. What do you see as the most vital issue for businesses in the Mad River Valley, and what would you do specifically to address it?
Okay, so workforce, as everybody said, and housing and childcare. As far as housing goes, I think that there are a lot of, well, there's many things happening at the state level, and we're waiting for that money to funnel down and figure out how that happens. We have a lot of obstacles at the local level from, I'm paying attention to what's happening in Fayston a lot because I've just joined the Planning Commission, and we have had some really difficult decisions made at the DRB level. And these conversations need to be had more publicly, and we need to be more transparent about what's happening and who's on these boards and whether or not they want housing and to what ends they're going to go to make that happen. We need a lot more dialogue. I would love to see the planning district eventually take over housing, have a leadership role in making sure that we do not just talk about it, not just plan, and not just get to these groups where we're all frustrated, but tiny little steps moving forward. One thing that I've been working on is accessory dwelling program, and the reason, that's not going to solve everything, of course, but if we do 5 of those in each of the 4 towns, in Duxbury, maybe, that could be 25 units a year, right? So if we also hold our breath and wait until we have some sort of infrastructure project downtown Waitsfield to have 25 building unit, that's the same thing, which could actually possibly happen. The ADU program is funded by community funds, right? So anyways, we'll see what happens at the Housing Summit, but I do think that there are things that are possible. They are in the works. Something that's not been popular that folks maybe don't want to talk about is local options tax. I think that if we had a local options tax and it went specifically to funding housing with tangible measures about how it's going to happen, I would be happy to support that.
Great, thank you, Rebecca.
And childcare. Okay.
Childcare.
Yeah.
Gene, this is questions for you to start. What's your view on the short-term rentals in the Mad River Valley and its impact on housing? What would you do as a legislator to encourage them to transition back into the regular housing rental market?
Actually, that's one of the issues with Vermont's new planning. It's a business. It's 2 businesses. There's a homeowner who wants to go on vacation, rent his house for the winter and go to Florida. It's not a business, it's just extra income. Then you have the corporate guys who are buying. In fact, I was in Moortown talking to an individual, and some guy bought a big house and it's just going to be short-term rentals. So we have to address that. So one of the ways you do that is to make a level playing field. So any short-term rental, and in our new ordinance coming up, they have to meet all life safety codes, which raises the bar Because if you have to make modification to your house for exit windows, for smoke alarms, I don't know how many people have, my house has everything, but raise the bar and put them on par with other businesses. Number two, they have to be registered. You have to know who they are. Number three, you have to make sure that that business is not going to interfere with the neighbors. And the complaints I hear as a constable is somebody rents a house and 5 cars there in a place for only 3 cars. So they're knocking the door. Half the time I don't even know who the owner is. So we need to know who the owners are. We have to have them registered and so forth. And we have to be careful, but if we treat them as a business and ensure that it's a level playing field, it raises the bar for these people. And the other thing, and I'm a conservative, and I hope I don't get struck by lightning, but there should be a special tax for those people who have a business as a short-term, as a business, not their home. Mm-hmm. And I think we can define that by registration, who we are and so forth.
All right, thanks, Gene. Carrie?
I've been going door to door. I think I'm up to over 650 doors now. Mm-hmm. And I've actually met a few individuals that manage a number of short-term rentals. One in particular was managing 75 short-term rentals in this area, this district. Another owned six houses, all for short-term rental. So, and we've seen the data that the Mad River Valley Planning District has shown in their housing studies, where a couple of our towns in particular have moved across that 50% mark, where over 50% of our houses are now second homeowners. It may not necessarily be in the second, in the short-term market, but it does raise concerns about, again, the availability of housing. We do have a housing summit coming up that, again, the Mad River Valley Planning District is hosting October 12th. And I think that's where we can put a number of these issues on the table. What we did last year was in the legislature was just a small step forward, which is to have that registration. That came up time and time again during COVID to make sure that we knew who was in these homes, who owned those homes. So it was for a public health and safety issue, but certainly as an opportunity, a first step to understanding where these are. 2 communities in the state, Stowe and Killington, both have their own town ordinances that help to regulate the short-term rental market, and I think those will probably be examples that we'll discuss at the summit. And there's also been talk about any additional fees assigned to short-term rental could go back to supporting leveraging of housing in that particular area. Again, I look forward to that summit where all these ideas can come on the market and hear from the public as to what they're most concerned about.
Excellent. Thanks, Carrie. Rebecca?
Yes, where it comes to short-term rentals, I definitely think we need some more regulation. I'm generally not going to say we need more regulation on most topics, but this is one. I think we're taking inventory out of the valley that could be our workforce, it could be our middle class, and people are making businesses out of it. And we are not getting enough tax revenue, enough incentives, we're not getting enough back here. And I think that we need to change that for sure. There is a 9% tax that is supposed to be assigned with it. My understanding is that Airbnb automatically does it, but VRBO, it's up to the owners to do it. And I don't know what Vacasa does, but that, everybody, that's not good enough. Another problem with the short-term rentals is the State House, they just passed some legislation for landlord-tenant laws, and so that people could enforce a complaint system, which is great. But what they did is they carved out short-term rentals, so it wasn't part of that. And so now, when it's already so hard to rent your house to a local, because you're going to make half as much potentially, they've actually created this barrier where you have less of a standard for your renter and less responsibility if you have a short-term rental. So I see those as big issues and huge priorities for me.
All right, thanks. Dara?
Yeah, I would agree. And, we're at kind of the beginning of figuring out how best to manage these. They are providing income for people who've made investments in their homes or who may be struggling to pay their taxes, So I want to be approaching this really carefully, and I'm glad that we have a community survey underway right now to get people's input on it. And it does seem like the kind of thing through collaboration and, learning together, that we could figure out how to make it possible for some people to continue to use and benefit from short-term rentals while not impacting the overall annual availability. And I think that we're the kind of community that's going to come up with a fair answer to this. And I think that as legislators, we would be able to support that. And perhaps there'll be some more studies that are needed to do that in the best way.
Great. Thank you. Specifically, I'm down here. I'm sorry. Specifically, I'm going to stick with housing because it's such an important thing. When I talk to business owners, it was time and time again, I'm like, oh, these questions are so housing focused, but it is what it is.
Yeah, sure.
I think there's a lot of generalities that we've been talking about, and things that aren't necessarily legislative. So I'd like to know specifically, what would your first priority be in resolving not only the Mad River Valley's housing crisis, but statewide, because that's where you're going to be working.
I've been a champion of full funding for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Fund. We already have a dedicated funding source. It's 50% of the property transfer tax dedicated towards the quasi-governmental entity that manages both our housing and conservation needs, and they use those dollars to leverage federal funds. Mm-hmm. We have been underfunding the Vermont Housing Conservation Board time and time again, and I've had, in every 2 years, I've submitted a bill for full funding. Had we been fully funding the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, we would not have had needed the housing bond that we passed a few years ago. All that, is still important revenues to dedicate towards housing, but we already have that funding source. We already have a crisis on hand across the board, and certainly in our area. It's time we start fully funding that board.
Thank you. Rebecca?
So as a freshman, there wouldn't be a whole lot of ability to impact something at the State House for the first 2 years. And it's also the beginning of a biennium, so you don't even know what's going to kind of come off the wall, right, and where you're going to be in that process. So for the first year or two, I would work on strengthening leadership at the local level so that we are ready and have the correct entities available to receive funds when they start coming down from the state, and we can do that in a coordinated fashion, ultimately as a 5-town area.
Excellent. Thank you. Dara?
Yeah, and I think, to complement what's been said, I would bring it back to our local ordinances and our planning that we do on the local level, because we do have to make decisions about where we want building to happen, where it makes sense. We have to make infrastructure investments. So I think that infrastructure has been a real big problem in rural areas. It's one of the big limiting factors in being able to create housing. So I think that, I don't know if I'm going to end up in an infrastructure committee, but I do think that that's an area that we could impact legislatively.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Gene?
I think I have the opposite opinion. America was built by entrepreneurs, mm-hmm. people who had money, who invested money for housing. I mean, just thinking, at the end of the Second World War, there was this huge housing deficit. All these GIs coming out, and a guy named Levitt built Levittown. Now, some people might shirk their shoulders and what, but the point is, he provided housing, starter housing. Those houses are now worth a lot of money, by the way, but it was business people who come and invest their money to make a return. All I hear about is the government, and again, from my experience in business and working, I worked all over the country with regulators, is they're the impediment. So I would spend my time trying to look at all the laws that are impeding businesses. Why can't, if you want to build a house here in Warren, go through the regulatory process, which is pretty expensive. If you want to do a planned unit development, oh my gosh, you're talking sidewalks, you're talking lights, it's like the Bronx, not even the Bronx, it's Westchester County where I came from. We can't have that. We can't be building costs in. And the government's really got to get out of the way and make it easy for business people to do that. I looked at a developer from Massachusetts that I know, said, well, why don't we go ahead and build some inexpensive homes. First of all, what kind of homes do we need? That was the big question. 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom. So we need to get to specifics. We keep talking generally. And Rebecca, right? We need to get down to specifics. What do we need to do and define it and not keep studying it? And the government shouldn't be spending money on this. We should be using private enterprise. And Act 68 and 60 is outrageous when I looked at, if you want to build a house, it costs you a lot of money and taxes. So how can we ameliorate those taxes? How can we bring those taxes more in line? I mean, I lived in Westchester County. I paid the same taxes here, and in Westchester County, it was, I got a lot of services for that money. Here I got nothing. I am the cop, the fire department, everything else.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. In the Valley Reporter Candidate Forum, there was a lot of talk about the need for increased access to childcare. And I know that's an issue among business, among the business community for sure. And I think we can all agree that it's a pretty important topic, and it's something that we, everyone, it's another, like housing, it's something that's pretty darn obvious to everybody. And I've heard talks about, in the Valley Reporter Candidate Forum, talking about all these different things that you'd like to see done. How do you fund it?
So I'm not sure which different things we're thinking of, so I can't say how we
I'm
fund it.
speaking generally,
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of different ideas thrown out there, and the ones that I think you think are maybe they're most beneficial from your perspective, and how it's going to be paid for, because that's what I'm looking at, and I know business owners are looking at like, okay, these are great programs and everything, but who's paying for this?
So currently, what the legislature did last year was they added some bumps to the subsidies, allowing subsidies to follow kids to daycare and provide more support, right? So basically, if you owe $100 a week, everybody wishes that that's all they owed. Depending on what you make, you might have to pay just 20 of that because the state covers the rest. And so that makes a big difference. And that's a whole benefit cliff thing. We can go into that forever, but you're not going to let me, so that's fine. What we also can do as a community is it took a long time for people to understand it was an issue. It wasn't on the radar as an issue until Neck of the Woods started fundraising. Parents know it, right? People who are putting their kids in these situations, employers know it, but actually as a community saying, hey, this is an issue, that was not what we were doing. And so that doesn't cost any money to be aware of what's happening. And all of these childcare places we have, they fundraise because they all run at a deficit, easily $20,000 for each of them. So that's one thing that we can do locally. The subsidies are already happening. Some of the things that need to, loan replacement or loan forgiveness rather for anybody who's in that industry, because believe it or not, if you want to get a Head Start certification, which is super important, I won't go into that unless you want to ask me later. You need to have an associate's and a bachelor's in child care development, but you need that for a job that pays $17 an hour. So we're in this place where parents can't afford to send kids, right? Especially if you're over the threshold for subsidies, and staff can't afford to work there, even if they're commuting from Granville, which I don't think they should have to do. But so we're stuck, and we're in this weird place where we're a capitalist society, but we have all of these pieces of our society that we need to be supported. How do we figure that out? I don't know.
I appreciate the honesty. Awesome.
Yeah, and I think
Sarah?
there's a word or a couple words for what Rebecca has described, and it's market failure. It's very obvious that this is a case where we actually need social policy and state support to make this work, because it isn't financially viable to provide the quality of care that our children deserve. So I think which pot it comes from, I'm not sure. I know there's a study that's supposed to wrap up in December that will show some potential pathways to fund this. But I think we are in agreement that we can't turn away from it any longer. That it's hurting our businesses just as much as it's hurting our families. And it's compromising our future.
All right, thanks, Tara. Gene?
Again, a very complicated question. And again, I hear the government being involved in this situation. And again, you look at where we live here in the Valley, our taxes are so high. I think $3 for every dollar we give to our school district goes into Neverland. And in Montpelier, and it gets sent out however knows. But the problem is, we're talking about government, we're talking about subsidies, we're talking about, but what does that mean? Taxes. So again, if we're one of the highest tax states in the country, you can argue whether it's California and so forth, but one of the top. So everything we're talking about is talking about taxes to pay for something. So that means that business has got to pay more tax. That means the individual who lives in that area is going to pay more tax. So the question is, how do we develop a child care system? And Rebecca said, you need a bachelor's in this and an associate in that. We ought to go back and look at those regs and say, are they necessary? For 2 years, we had to send our children to childcare. It was a local woman. We knew her very well. She took care of about 5 or 6 kids, and it didn't cost us a whole lot of money. But now we, again, go back to the government, regulation, regulation, regulation. We got to look at those regulations and say, how can we trim them down? What really makes sense? You know, and try to make it more affordable for even to be in that business. And if we're going to subsidize it, we're going to wind up in the same problem as we have with colleges. Kids are getting stupid loans, $200,000, $300,000, God forbid, and now they get stuck with these loans. If the colleges weren't so expensive, so we have to work on the expense side, because if we don't work on that, then our taxes it'll be a circle. Money in, money out, money in. So we really need to fix that whole expense side.
Thanks, Gene. You remember the question, Carrie?
I do.
Okay, you're good. It's been a while.
And it's a good question. It's a hard question. We've been incrementally trying to address this. This past year it was $4.9 million to extend the child care subsidy, to provide a loan forgiveness for employees and some other grants for employees. We're looking at educational systems. We're finding that most people who are finishing high school are needing some certification for continuing in their career of choice, and yet they are not sure how to go about getting the right certification for this. So we've addressed this in an incremental way at the legislature by acknowledging, certainly for those that have been in the business as providing for child care, quality child care at child care facilities. We've provided an acknowledgement by making equivalent the number of years towards a degree. We still have a long way to go. We know what we've done is not enough. Rebecca had mentioned a number of key challenges. The facility is expensive and often has maintenance issues. The livable wage is a challenge for those that are working there, and they see quite a bit of turnover. Working families absolutely need them if we expect two income members of the household to be able to have their kids in a safe and quality child care facility. So we know we need them. It's not that easy. We started, I mentioned that 4.9 million. We started at a higher level and ended up where we ended up. So we have a long way to go to still address all those parts of making childcare available for our working families.
I appreciate this, and I still feel like I never got an answer about who's paying for this from anyone.
Everybody.
Right. Okay. How about we go to something different, huh?
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. I spoke to a restaurant owner just yesterday, actually, and he said that a common gripe is that it's hard to operate a business in Vermont. An example of this is returning redeemable cans and bottles. One local business owner told me that some distributors don't take back the returnables, and he is left to deal with them, and he doesn't get the deposit money back because there's no place he can take them. He pays staff 2 hours a week to sort bottles. It's an onerous responsibility for his business. What can be done about this and other consequences of legislation like it? I think we're back to you, right, Rebecca?
So I wonder, the bottles and sheds, or the bottles and cans shed behind the Waitsfield Church, I think they pulled in like $20,000 this year, right? And that is
I did tell him about that, by the way.
A retired couple that goes and they schlep it down there, and they get the redeemables, and all the nonprofits know about them, and the schools know about them, and we say, hey, so-and-so needs boots, and Dorothy Peck runs out and gets boots, right? And so this business owner, I understand. I've had a business. So the idea of him doing that or her doing that is ridiculous. But can you partner with the Boy Scouts? I know you want to change the law.
Saying, he actually said that he was going to call them. But his gripe is, you're making me do it.
Yeah.
And then you don't make it the ability
Yes.
to actually get paid back. He paid money.
Yes.
And he's not getting the money back. And why is it up to him to donate it to the Boy Scouts or to the church or whoever?
Right.
That's the point, is that he was making.
I get the point. But here's my solution, is you could reach out to Boy Scouts or whomever, and that money can go back in the community in a different way. And I do appreciate how aggravating it is, the amount of laws you need. Because when I had a deli, what I needed to get it open for the fire system was insane, because it didn't fit all the right blocks. So I completely understand that. And as they come up from business owners, from you, and work on them together and figure out which committee and where we can push that around, I will be diligently on any of those kind of things. But this one was not on my radar.
Right? I thought it was a nice thing to change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Tara, tell us about your bottle bill feelings.
Well, that was one of the things I meant to study up on because I know that we've been struggling with getting the bottle bill passed. So it's something I want to learn more about, and thinking about it in those concrete terms from a local business owner is really helpful, because it does raise a good question about where that value belongs. And I know that we have a lot of issues right now about recycling and how it's not working well, and that it's not financially viable. So, we need to investigate this more, and I think we need more support for the bottle bill next session.
Gene?
Well, that's interesting. Forgive my ignorance, but I thought part of the whole law was that the businesses were paying for those bottles, and that whoever they were buying from had to reimburse them.
So did I.
So that just needs to be fixed. I mean, you're selling those bottles. Now, what happens there then is the cost of that bottle goes up a nickel and whatever, and it gets back in circulation. But it's simply, if you're selling a product to a vendor, you have to accept them back. Or, maybe working with Casella, which is huge, and the other waste management people, to go ahead and collect those bottles, pay the individual, and then go, and Casella's big enough guy to go knock on the door and say, hey, give me my money. So maybe just working with recycling organizations to have that, here, we're going to buy these, and then if a distributor fails to apply, it gets a little, you got to do it. I mean, because they're making a lot of money. I mean, they paid that distributor the 5 cents for all those bottles, so that's, to me, that's not right. So.
It was news to me, too.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Carrie?
We have only one landfill in the state of Vermont. It has 20 more years in that landfill capacity. It's right on the banks of Lake Memphremagog. The town of Coventry is done with expanding that one sole line landfill. Already we're collecting so much waste from that landfill in form of leachate that we distribute around the state to try to manage it. Oftentimes it's toxic, it has to be sent at a cost out of state. So somehow we need to figure out how to lengthen the life of that Coventry landfill until we get another landfill built. We know those are going to be expensive. It's going to cost all of us if we need to expand that landfill or build another one. It's going to cost all of us money. So part of that strategy is to figure out how we do better. Recycling is part of that, and the bottle bill. And the intent of the bottle bill, it never finished. It went over the finish line last year, but the intent was to create enough revenue to build more redemption centers that are near, scattered across the state, so that can ease the space limitations of our businesses. So that's the intent of making it easier for businesses with a system that can be modernized and help save us money in the long run.
Great. So I'll tell him not to hold his breath.
Boy Scouts.
Gotcha. I'm trying to think. I think I've got, this is an interesting one. This is my last of my questions, and then we're going to go to your questions. Who did I leave off with? I think we're off to Dara, right?
Yeah.
In your view, what is the impact of climate change and the transition to renewables on Mad River Valley businesses? And do you see opportunities for our local business community?
I'm really happy that I got this question.
Me too.
Yeah, because I'm very excited about it. I think it's a huge opportunity. And I think that we're primed for it because we have a history of innovation and a history in energy. And we have so much work to do. And we need to be able to invest in our homes and our businesses. We need to be able to retrofit our heating systems. And a lot of this is going to require workforce. And it's going to require innovation, entrepreneurial innovation. And I think that's something that we could build here. And we could try to have more. I think we've learned from the pandemic and issues with the supply chain just how painful it is when there's issues. And I would like to see something as important as weatherization and the need that we have to make our homes more comfortable, more cost effective to heat. That we need to be able to do that work with people that live here and with materials that we can produce and source here. Like I see a lot of a real open playing field with a lot of technological innovation as well as process innovation. And I don't see why it couldn't happen here.
All right. Thanks, Gene.
Again, a very complicated question. Nothing is really easy when you look at when you talk about environment and so forth.
If it were easy, Gene,
we would be here. Correct.
So
just to quickly answer your question, there are companies that make incineration systems that produce hardly any environmental impact. A friend of mine is an environmental engineer. So we have so much garbage. You can turn garbage to energy and regulate that gas flow out. So that would be one solution. And the other problem was the state closed our landfill right up the street. And instead of looking at ways to how to make it better or improve it, they just closed it. So again, when the state gets involved, and it goes back to regulation, what was wrong with the regulation? And let's fix that. So the environment is, again, we all live in it, so we need to protect it and survive in it. When you start looking at I hate to say this, the government getting involved in solving problems, it doesn't work. And again, to entrepreneurialism, we have tons of people. We have Sun Electric Company, the solar guy, and it's weatherizing. You can call up a contractor now and say, hey, I need my house weatherized. So through Vermont Efficiency Vermont, you can get subsidies to do that. And I think that if an individual was going to change their furnace, was going to change their windows, that they should be able to submit that and get a tax break and not take the money and share that money, so it doesn't require this whole thing. Yeah, I changed all my windows, it's $20,000, okay, we'll give you $15,000 for it. So now the state's losing revenue. So now I have to make it up someplace else. But I think by offering subsidies to the individuals and tax breaks, more people will be more inclined because they'll hire Wards or Bourne or one of those companies to do it.
Okay.
So tax breaks.
Thanks. Carrie?
Dara had mentioned a number of benefits that you get when you weatherize your house, when it's time to switch out an old inefficient boiler with a more efficient one, with switching out your old heating system with perhaps an air source heat pump of sorts, more efficient wood heating. There are a lot of options now, and the more dollars you can save from having a more efficient heating system, the more comfortable you'll be, the more dollars stay in place. You're not sending those dollars overseas to wherever we're drilling for oil or gas, and at the end of the result, you're actually reducing your own carbon footprint. So there are opportunities for us that help us achieve all those benefits. And the entrepreneurship is I think, really exciting there because we already are seeing it play out across Vermont and in our region with startup and well-run businesses that are offering these sets of new heating systems or new electricity systems, renewable-based systems. And not to mention, in addition to that, there's a whole suite of ways we can adopt to improve the health of our forests and our ag soils, for example. So in our working lands, there are opportunities for us to become more resilient as well through smart ways of investing in new technologies, new approaches that can help minimize the impacts to a changing climate.
Excellent, thank you.
Give me the question again.
Oh, I can read this to you again.
Thanks.
Where am I? In your view, what is the impact of climate change and the transition to renewables on Meadow River Valley businesses, and do you see opportunities for our local business community?
Okay, I agree with everybody else just talked about innovation, so certainly. And I see, we're having more and more, like Lawson's just put up the solar panels. And right now we're talking about solar with down streets and EV stations. And so there's definitely I see a movement here. And I think if I were to define this community any way, it would be as environmentalists. So this is something that is always on the front of the mind of folks. But when I think about climate change and different laws that are going to be put in place or different stressors, it makes me think of the clean heat standard and how that would have added some taxes to heating fuel and gasoline that would have made it a little more difficult for our working class and our businesses. And while I think it's necessary to move away from, the fuel, it has to be done in a slow enough time that the entire group, everybody can kind of keep up with it, not just the wealthy people.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Rebecca. I want to wrap up with questions from you folks. And Jean, we'll start with you. What question do you have for your fellow candidates?
Well,
that's really, again, focusing on business.
Strictly on business, and it was sticking with the environmental solution. We're just seeing this nightmare occurring in Florida. Those homes are going to be out without power for 3, 4, 5 weeks. Depends. I mean, that's a huge disaster. Here in Vermont, we do see every so often, more so now than before, power outages, 2, 3, 4 days at a time, and depending upon the storm. So I'm concerned, do any of my fellow candidates have any concern about going all electric and looking at issues where you are going to have power outages? The infrastructure is not strong enough. And we don't have enough power here in Vermont because Sugarbush has to turn up their list every so often. Go, oh. So how are we going to achieve our goals when, one, we don't have enough power? Now, what's the impact when we do have an outage and a disaster? How are you going to manage this if we're all trying to drive around electric? I'm just concerned how that's going to work.
Carrie, you want to take that question on first?
Yeah, I think it's really a three-pronged answer to it. One is certainly efficiency. We have to look at ways to improve our efficiencies across the board. The second is renewable energies options or sources are usually used to address certain peaks, so it helps to shave the peak. They're not the sole source that we fully rely on for all our energy sources. It still plays an important piece. And you're right, the aging of our grid system is something that we need to continue to invest in. But thirdly, there's a whole movement towards a decentralized approach so that you create localized, similar to a decentralized wastewater system that we're particularly familiar with. There's a whole movement across the country at looking at a decentralized approach towards energy development for electricity, where you can actually create those the efficiencies at the more local level, and you reduce that reliance on some of the grid. And then the final part is storage. That's electricity storage is where many businesses are investing in to help provide that backup power for when they need it. But I share your concerns about the impacts of climate on our system, and it's why we need to continue to invest in the maintenance of our grid.
Rebecca?
Well, Carrie just gave a way better answer than I would, because this isn't really my this isn't really my wheelhouse. But I think of how we just went through a pandemic and the effort it took to get people to get vaccinated. Right? Some people are early adapters and some people are not. And I just think of this the same way. Same with energy. We have early adapters and we have all these incentives, and people are going to gradually go in that direction. But we're not going to see such a ginormous shift in the next 20 years that everybody's on the same grid, right? Are we?
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
I guess I'll compliment what you all have shared so far to say that this idea of distributed energy is really key, because it allows us to have flexibility, and managing the load is one of the keys. In addition to efficiency, using less energy. The most cost-effective thing is the watt you don't need. And so we have to continue to invest in efficiency, as Carrie pointed out. But also, for example, when you decide to change out your hot water heater, you can do so now and get a heat pump hot water heater. And with our investments in broadband, and as our co-op, our electric utilities and co-ops invest more in their infrastructure, you can actually have everybody's hot water heater playing a role in taking energy, using electricity to heat that water when it's the cheapest and most abundant. So we're really looking at a whole new world energy-wise. It's a very different way of thinking. And so our transmission planners right now in Vermont they're thinking this through. A lot of scenario planning is going on to imagine what will be needed to be able to take on the extra load. But I hear you also about how do we have backup power? Right. Everything's electric. Well, a lot of things that are not electric, like your heating system, also doesn't work when you don't have electricity. So even if you're on fossil fuels. So we do need to think about our most vulnerable people, and maybe investing in some microgrids and really knowing who can't be without power in an emergency. And then we all, we want to think about getting storage in the form of batteries for our homes. And that needs to become more affordable. It's out of reach for a lot of people right now.
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate that. Carrie, do you have a question for your fellow candidates?
I do. The Mad River Valley has been home to a number of businesses that started out here, grew, and then left. Green Mountain Coffee Roasters is an example, Mad River Canoe, even Merrill hiking shoes started in Wheatsfield.
And Mad River Canoe.
We mentioned Mad River Canoe, which
we know about.
We know about. Interested to know your perspective of what we can do to support new businesses but keep them here.
So I actually don't think it's a problem that businesses get started here and they get to a certain size and they have to move. I think this is a great place to incubate, and I think creative people are drawn to this area. But because of how far we are from the highway and what we have for housing and general infrastructure, we're just not an environment for large businesses. So I'm okay with this model. I know this, I've heard from Economic Vitality Series, everybody's like, why does everybody go? Why do they leave? I think it's okay. You grow up and you leave the house. Okay. Oh my God, was that an awful answer? That's all right, it's my answer. I'm staying with it.
Tara?
Yeah, I don't think that's an awful answer.
Thank you.
Being an incubator has been good. But I do think that, we're kind of in a new world now in terms of the ability for people to work at home. And I wonder how much of the businesses of the future will be able to stay. Especially if we have made investments in our energy infrastructure that could support having some larger businesses here for longer. But my question, well, I guess I'll wait for my question.
Jane?
Those companies that left because of the valley and its regulations. Green Mountain Coffee Roaster wanted to expand. They couldn't, because of the regulations. People didn't want it, and that goes to that question way back when. You have people on a planning board that's No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So they left because they couldn't expand. I think the canoe guys, something about the chemicals they use was annoying. I forgot what it, and it cost to go ahead and change that and filter out those. So again, if kids do grow up and leave, but what do we talk about in housing all the time? We want the kids to stay in our valley and work.
But not necessarily in our houses.
Right.
Not in our houses.
I want to make that clear, boys.
Go live someplace else. In fact, I heard that comment from a woman. A kid's still living in a house because he can't afford something. But that's back. So I think it goes back to regulation, taxation. How do we make it affordable for businesses to grow? How do we have common sense regulation in dealing with those businesses? And I think we do need a good base business. Sugar Bush is okay. I forgot how many people they employ there full time, but in summer, in the wintertime, there's like 1,000 people. Mm-hmm. And I guess they're building housing for that right now. But we want to have people that live and work in our society because it benefits all the businesses. So how do you do that? Again, it has to be economically affordable, and the regulations, and I'm not saying free run. I believe in strict regulations for safety and the environment. You can't be emitting crap into the air, but we have to look at those and clean them up. And then power, it's a big issue. The valley here, we could go out and buy a new thorium reactor for the valley. They're pretty cheap. They don't take up much space, and that would provide distribution. And then last mile, we've been talking about that since I came to the valley. In fact, I applied for a job to get that job done for the state. They didn't hire me, so that's why it's not done. But there's $30 million invested 15 years ago, and nobody knows where that money is. So the last mile, we could do that, but we need to sit down and have professionals that actually understand what to do and do it. And so it's regulation, taxes, and regulation, taxes.
Thank you. Rebecca, I know you have a question.
I want
got
two, and they're
two.
both super short.
Okay, as long as they're short.
All right, here's the first one.
And related.
To each other? No.
I'll let it go.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll let it
I told you in the beginning we were going to be informal, right?
Yeah,
Right.
I'm taking advantage. So, favorite swim hole? Go.
Ooh.
Yeah, tell us your secrets.
Well, I like the one that now we have lost access to.
Which one?
The mill.
Oh, Bobbin Mill?
Why am I forgetting the name of it in Warren?
Warren Falls.
No.
No?
No.
Don't say the
Not the
Bobbin
mill?
Mill because they closed
They
it.
closed it
That's
because
what
they
she's
didn't
saying.
like.
Yeah. Oh.
You probably know what I mean.
Yeah, I think it's the bottom.
Bobbin Mill.
Bobbin Mill. Thank you. I didn't hear Bobbin. I just heard
Bobbin, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was
That was
really
nice.
a tough. I understand why it happened, but that is something that we've lost in other venues as well. We've lost the goodwill of landowners, and it's painful. It's a real loss for our community when that happens. But yeah, that was one of my favorites because it wasn't very crowded,
That was good.
and it was beautiful.
Gene, what's your favorite swim hole?
Blueberry Lake. But I'm lucky. I can go there when nobody else is there. I can go there later or earlier. But then it's national parks. They really need to, again, when you talk about expansion, you talk about more crowds. But I like Blueberry Lake. Warren Falls I used to like, but now I have to enforce all the parking regulations. There's one thing I'm going to work with the state with, is to allow the town to enforce parking because it's a disaster. The troops can't get there. The sheriff's only around sometimes. So the Warren Falls is like one of the most popular places around. But
This is not what you were expecting.
I know. I was like, said it was going to be a quick one.
oh, okay.
I have another one.
This is like a 2
All right,
minute.
all right. I'm done.
Meadow Road.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
Can I answer this?
Which one?
Oh, please answer.
I get to answer this.
Meadow Road.
Yeah.
Oh,
Moortown
Meadow.
Gorge.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful.
I shouldn't
Nice.
say Moortown's going
No,
to be
you
mad at
shouldn't
me.
have said
They
that.
are.
Right?
They are.
Yeah, all right. And if anyone wants to know where the really good skiing at Mad River Glen is, so you have one more
Super
question.
quick. Yeah. So we talked about this in the last interview, and I already know everybody else's answers, but just because this is a new audience,
Yes.
and this is one
Hopefully.
of the most important things for me, reproductive liberty amendments. Where do you stand on it? And I was going to say,
Sure.
what does it mean? But you already know that.
Yeah.
And how are we going to make sure your kids vote for it?
Well, both of my kids are registered voters. I will be voting yes, and you know, as I said before, I'm grateful that we planned ahead for this. It took a while to make it happen, and it's going to enshrine our current rights and prevent us from having to face some future that's uncertain. And I think that that's why I'm going to be voting yes.
Gene?
I'm going to vote against it, and I'm going to use the same reason I used the last time. There are no provisions to protect a baby after 21 weeks. I went and researched it. Somebody in the last one said, oh no, that's not going to happen. Well, I did go and look at the two statutes, Title 18, Chapter 223, and the four statutes within that, 94, 93, 94, 94, 94, 96, 94, 97. One allows all abortions at any time for anyone, and the second one prohibits anybody from interfering with that. And if you go read 22, Amendment 22, which is Prop 5, is there are no provisions to stop late-term abortions. And you know, any society that is that callous is a problem. And then go look at the laws. Go look at there's not one restriction allowed in either the state statutes today. Now, I'm not for abortion per se, but you know, there is a certain amount that, yeah, it's okay. You know, we can't get nuts. But at 21 weeks, we know that there is a little human in there with a beating heart and a brain, it has motions. So we need to understand that that is precious life. Now, there are exceptions. Emergencies, of course, ER doc, hey, I'm gonna make. So we can craft those into the current law, but to allow abortions anytime, totally unrestricted, and if you disagree, go look at the law. Read the law. There's no restrictions anywhere in either the amendment, and if they wanted to change the amendment and say, yeah, we need to consider. In fact, if anybody wants to read Roe versus Wade, that consideration is in there at that 21 weeks. And if you look at the current regulation, it doesn't ban all abortions, and it doesn't allow, but it does say, let the community have some common sense. You know, you just don't have a choice to kill your kid when you don't like it. You just don't. You can't go rob somebody so the community does have certain restrictions that it places on all of us throughout our lives. And yeah, a woman is the mother. Can we say the word today? The mother is incubating this little human, and I believe at a certain point there's a responsibility to maintain the life, and that's just my view.
Carrie?
Well, there is a federal ban on late-term abortions, so that supersedes. And this is putting Roe v. Wade, which is 21-week time of gestation, into statute. Into the Vermont Constitution. I am supporting it, and it will now go in front of the voters for the final vote to decide. But Rebecca, this is one question I need to ask your opinion on, your position.
Oh, I'm coming off a little spacey today. Yeah, no, I'm listening so deeply, like I have to pull it
Did
together.
we get your swim hole?
I'm not telling you my swim hole. No, we have the same swim hole. We have the same swim hole.
Okay.
Yeah, I absolutely support this. And I will be dressed in Halloween and as a suffragette costume, right? Because 100 years ago we got the right to vote, and now we're going to be able to make, forever in Vermont, decisions about our own bodies. So that's exciting for me.
But will you be serving full-size candy bars at your house?
Yes.
No way, we got a road.
Carrots.
Well, this fun, I don't buy this whole fun size thing. The fun size should be bigger.
Right.
That would be more fun.
More fun.
Right?
More fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Tara, what is your
My question?
question?
I have two as well, and you can choose which one to answer.
Okay.
How about that? One, I wanted to just kind of pick back up on the LOT, the local options tax, that I think both of you might have mentioned, and just how you feel about it.
Like,
Gene?
okay,
Oh,
go ahead.
We know
To the
what
I
that
got to keep going this
right,
way.
sorry,
I'm going to get really confused.
Yeah.
I'm against that. Absolutely against that. I think the better way to do it is to lower the cost. Or maybe, I think I suggested when we talked about local option tax in that debate, I wrote an article in the Valley Reporter, And I said, well, why don't we just allocate out of the current state tax? The sales tax that we give to the state, we get a little piece back. We should get a bigger piece because, one, all our tourists are paying for our environment. So instead of adding a tax, have the state give us back some of that money. And if we were going to do it, I would put it to public safety. I mean, Mervis is having a hard time. They had to come to us for ambulance, money for ambulance. The fire departments are having a hard time. So if I were going to look at it, I would say it would have to go to public safety. But again, I don't think we should do it. The state should give us more money back.
Carrie?
Well, a local option tax is where a community decides to tax themselves, and it can be applied to either sales, rooms, meals, or alcohol, or all of the above. So it's up to the community.
But not, as I understand it, not cannabis. Am I correct about that?
I don't know that.
Oh,
answer.
interesting.
This I think the rules for local option tax predates cannabis regulations, so it probably hasn't. I don't know the answer to that. But.
Sorry to interrupt. I just
No, that's important.
But that's
wondering
what
about
a
that.
local option tax is, and it's up to the community. The community needs to vote for it, and the revenues generated, only a portion comes back to the municipality with the local option tax. The rest goes to support what's called pilot, which is the funding to support the taxes that would be paid for the state-owned properties in that town. And so I had 2 bills each year, each of my 2 years. I submitted a bill that should a town vote in our district, vote to pass a local option tax, a higher percentage of the revenues generated. I think the existing statute says 70%. A higher percentage, I first tried 90%, and then my second bill was at 80%, would be retained by the town for their purposes, and ideally it could be a potential funding source for housing, for example. But that would be only if a town of a certain size, and I was aiming for a town under 2,000, which would accomplish all 5 of our towns, would follow within that category. But again, trying to help smaller towns help themselves on priorities that they see as valuable to reinvest in for their own vitality. But it's really up to the towns to vote for or against that.
Great, thanks.
And I would agree with the local options tax as long as it was very clear where that money was going. And best if it was done as a 5 or 4 or even a 3-town effort, not just one.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Gene, you have a question for
Well, if we go
colleagues
back,
here?
we go back to our local option tax.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's right. I didn't get to your local option tax question.
No, I did. I was
You
the
did?
second one.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
Forget it.
I'm easily confused, so.
So, as a representative, what infrastructure improvements would you make for the Valley? I mean, we're a Valley representative, so what infrastructure could be done here in the Valley to make a better business climate for businesses and for people who come here to recreate and give us all the money that we have?
Kara?
Well, we've been able to, this past year in particular, dedicate, I think, $250 million towards broadband. And we anticipate under the federal funding, the infrastructure federal funding that's coming our way, another $100 million towards broadband. And that will provide high-speed internet. And our goal is to, at every household across the region. And while I've been going door to door, now I'm in Duxbury, I've been leapfrogging over the Central Vermont Fiber, CV Fiber people. So I'm hopeful that we're making progress there, but that's a #1 priority to help our businesses, those businesses that may be working remote as well as all the other community benefits that that kind of investment has. In addition to that, while I was in the legislature, I scanned through the budget. I worked my tail off and created a 10-page detailed analysis as the budget liaison to the budget committee and identified where we could be making investments using federal funding that could help our towns. One of them, for example, was to make sure that there was enough money for decentralized wastewater systems for our smaller communities, Therefore, not all the money would go to larger cities and communities in the state. Making available anyway, should we decide to pursue that, dollars for investment into decentralized wastewater systems. Also supported funding for aging infrastructure for smaller communities, funding for water, wastewater, for our manufactured home parks and being able to have access to that. So I worked hard to ensure that in addition to broadband, when we talk about housing, we need that water, wastewater, especially if we're looking at it in smaller lot sizes, and having that water, wastewater infrastructure is another important way to go, because that will, again, complement our need for housing in this area.
Okay, thanks, Carrie.
What she said, right? Yeah, broadband, wastewater, also any way that we could have towns collaborate and share a town garage, if we're going to count that as that kind of infrastructure. I know that's a hot topic. But
Yeah,
We're still paying for ours, so Moretown's not ready.
All right,
nice doors, beautiful
Yeah, it's
doors.
beautiful.
Basin needs one, Warren needs one, and
Yeah.
Waitsfield's talking about a new one. But
Yeah.
that's
Thank
what I
you.
would say.
And succinct.
That is
Love it.
what I'm going to say. That is what I said. What she said.
I would agree as well. And on the wastewater, one of the reasons I like to swim at the Bobbin Mill is because the water is clean there. And, that was...
Except for those dogs.
Well,
Unleashed.
the investment that was made in Warren Village really paid off. And, it took a long time for that kind of funding opportunity to come up again, but it's coming. So it's a really exciting time for our villages to be able to think about doing this transformational investment. But at the same time, I'm also thinking about resilience and the fact that a lot of us, we live with, septic systems. And we're living in a wetter place. We're going to have more and more precipitation events. And I think our, the engineering behind our systems may no longer be adequate. We may need to be investing a lot more in our home septic systems. And I see an opportunity while we do that to also increase the ability for us to add housing to our homes, add density as we make these investments, with the ADU, thinking about, well, what infrastructure investment might need to go along with that. So I would like to imagine that there could be some funding to help homeowners make these investments and have, the infrastructure we need to keep our systems working and keep it clean.
Great. Well, thank you.
Can I answer my question?
What's that?
I can't.
Well, I don't know. Can you answer your own question?
I don't
Isn't
know.
that sort of rhetorical?
Well, I asked a question. Obviously, I had an answer. No, it's okay.
Well, now I'm curious. I'd like to know. Can I?
A short one.
The very first thing I would do is pave Roxbury Mountain Road 1.5 miles and Moortown Mountain Road, which I've driven up and down. Beautiful road, and that would be about $7 million. So say round numbers, $10 million just to fix those two roads, because it allows people to go back and forth. They're major corridors. We can call Roxbury Route 17, and we can call Moortown 2B. And $10 million, the state, how much money did the state get for infrastructure? How many billion dollars do we get? Out of that money, we should be able to take $10 million just to fix those two roads. And I believe, again, to infrastructure and broadband, I designed a nationwide network all over the country. We should go to the providers and say, what do you need to finish this, and incent them to do it. The government should not be involved in that business. But those enterprises should be. Granville, they hired their own guy, and they saved for 8 years. Now they have fiber. Granville, of all places. So there's ways to do it, but not the government. That's just
All
my
right.
opinion.
Well, I appreciate the questions.
Yeah.
And I want to throw this out there, because whoever the heck wins here in terms of infrastructure for the Mad River Valley,
Yeah.
this is what we need, okay? Because the number one question I get from all of these leaf peepers coming in through at the Chamber of Commerce is, do you have a public restroom? So what I challenge the four of you, that when you get into the legislature, that you make the Mad River Valley the place to go. Okay?
Well, I'll have to go to Paris and look at how they did all their public things. And
With who?
I'll have to go to Paris because they have.
Okay,
and
we'll
come
have to
back
go
here.
on a trip. Fact-finding trip. I'm with you, man. That's
leave
right.
the Robin Mill out of it.
But thank you so much for participating today. Really appreciate it. Whoever wins this, I really hope that you will engage with the Chamber and our business community to be involved and understand where their perspectives and where they're coming from. And I'm here for you as a liaison, so please know that. You folks out there in TV land, make sure you vote. I heard it's the first Tuesday in November, as usual, right?
This year.
As usual. So please do get out and vote. And thanks everyone for attending. And thanks again to Metaver TV and the LaRue Farm for hosting us, American Flatbread. And I also want to encourage folks to please go and look at the other forum that the Valley Reporter did. And thanks for coming. As our audience. The Valley Reporter's here. All the news that's fit to print, and then some. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.